Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for January's Layer 7 office hours. This morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you're at, we have a special guest. One of our key partners, Jon Shendt of Vista Accent Solutions, is going to be talking about something that is kind of near and dear to many of you. So, with that, I'll turn it over to John. Before I do that, just as a reminder, we will be doing Q&A toward the end, and also this session will be available up on Communities shortly after we're done with the session today. So, go ahead, John.
All right, thanks a lot, Bill. Morning, afternoon, everyone. So like Bill mentioned, I work with a company called Vista Accent Solutions. We specialize in identity access management, cybersecurity solutions, and then utilizing a lot of the Broadcom Layer 7 stack. So it's kind of why we've been talking today. I'm in a interesting position because I work in the federal space, and so a lot of the same customizations and things that I've seen, uh, many of you may have experience with, but some of these might be kind of new or strange. So feel free to just ask why. So our environment, like I mentioned, federal space, we are 100% air gapped. There is no just bringing in tools, solutions, everything's got to get approved. What we use our layer 7 for, which kind of helps set the stage, is enabling multiple projects through our system. So we are kind of the nexus, the entry point into 50 or 60 other different projects, all operating in their own spaces, and some that we host. But we are the enforcement and the decision points for all of those projects simultaneously. So as a result, we have a lot of unique looks into various projects. There's a lot of specialization that each of those projects require. But then there's also a lot of similarities, a lot of things that we can create some modular code around. And that's kind of where we got started. So some of these enterprise capabilities that we've brought up, we'll be talking about is our token service. But we've got some other ones there that we might be able to talk about if there's time. Like I mentioned, all of these different groups are unique in their data, their APIs, their processing, their security, everything. Uh, but there are some commonalities that we can take advantage of and leverage um, to get them the data they need, but also more importantly to protect the data that they have. One of the benefits of our environment is this is a 100% PKI enabled environment. So everyone's got a certificate. Unfortunately, I don't have any certificates on my current workstation, so I won't be able to show all of those. But there are some advantages and disadvantages of having a 100% PKI enabled system. We can go through those a little bit later too. Also, just in case anyone isn't familiar, I did put up just a brief slide overview on what ABAC is, or attribute-based access control is. Essentially, it's a way to define a user either gaining or being denied access to data. So there's an enforcement point, which is what we're using the gateway for. The decision point, which is also the gateway. This is our layer 7 solution right here. And then obviously evaluating through policy, and then pulling additional information, so attributes, and we'll kind of go through that as well. So before we created what I would consider a more modern enterprise token service, we had a very rudimentary JWT. I don't even know if it was signed in the beginning, but we had a JWT process. And really what that was going back to our ABAC model, looking at that information. We were getting a bunch of information, a bunch of attributes based on your PKI, based on the user that you were coming in as. And then we could kind of permit or deny access based on that. So someone gave us the great idea that we should put that into a JWT. Makes a lot of sense. So we implemented that. It was very quick. Layer 7's already got all the stuff in place for JWTs to include signing and encryption. So that made it really easy to just kind of start standing that up. And our customers liked it because that was something that we could send to them. They could provide a secondary look at all those attributes maybe start creating some roles based on those, comparing it to their internal database, their user lookups. So that was kind of a powerful tool. We were able to make decisions and then also send that information back. So that was, our customers really liked that. It was easy for them to read. It was all JSON. It was pretty common readable format. But then we had some of the security backend with, having signed JWTs. It's still, excuse me, it's still poor security compared to some of the other offerings that were out there at the time. Some projects were taking the information we were sending back and then placing that in cookies as a bearer token. So it got to be kind of a security issue at some points. Um, Anyone who you worked with bearer tokens knows they're fairly insecure. If you own the token, you you're the owner of the token, um, which is not always great. We prefer to do more trust-based things, yeah, so things like that. So we weren't very excited to hear that people were going to using bearer tokens and using all the information that we were securing. So also, several tools just didn't have JSON processing. Again, in the federal space, you get some outdated software, you get some outdated paradigms. A lot of the groups that we do support had web servers, so they had all of that stuff kind of in place. They could do some authorization and authentication if they really needed to, but they rely on us to do most of that. And so we started getting into this issue where we needed more, and that's kind of where OAuth came in. So the big one that kind of tipped us into looking at OAuth was Kafka. Kafka is a message passing, I call it a bus, but it's a message passing tool. It's highly scalable, very performant if you configure everything correctly. And there's an auth-z auth-n capability or plugin in there called Strimzy. And Strimzy didn't have a JWT offering off or out of the gate, and the current project didn't have anyone who was qualified to operate that or to modify that. So that's kind of what forced us down an OAuth 2.0 spec. But we were kind of getting there anyways. So all of a sudden we had to develop this OAuth capability that still leveraged our JWT processing that's been in place for years at that point, and find a way to manage this. So when we started talking about uh, creating modular tools, creating modular processes, what are the fewest number of steps that I have to take to a update both of these token services at the same time? And so that's where we kind of started getting into some of our customization. And like any good engineering process, let's look at the options. So we did look at just stubbing out an OAuth spec endpoint where someone could go and get a quote unquote ID token or claims attributes, and it just looked like the OAuth spec. Um, Pretty poor security, but it would kind of satisfy some of those requirements that we were getting, but doesn't really meet the need, right? The other option was building a custom Strimzy processor. We had looked at that as well, but it was around that time that we had several other projects that were looking for OAuth. They were looking for SAML. They were kind of into that next generation of trade space where we're looking for various authorization protocols, and it's kind of where the platforms were moving anyways. So we get to do a little extra work. We get to learn a ton. We get to figure out OAuth in the process and build out the whole spec. So again, Layer7 had a lot of that just kind of set up in the API gateway through the OAuth toolkit, but we had to make some modifications in order to get it in the way we needed it to look. So the first one is PKI enablement. Anyone who's used the OAuth toolkit knows that it's username and password based. That didn't work for any of our stuff. We use PKI enablement for logging into the policy manager. We use it for every service that's on our networks. So we had to go through quite a bit of modification just to get to the PKI authentication. I don't have the full list of things that changed, but I can provide that later if someone's looking to make that switch. It's fairly involved, but at the same time, it's just changing little things here and there. Really, just forcing, instead of username passwords, looking at the certificate DNs that are being sent through. So it's not terrible. Modifying token endpoints. I'm I was really happy to see the first time we loaded up the OAuth toolkit that the user that comes through in the claims is Darth Vader. So that's always fun. So Darth Vader was replaced with our token spec, and we can show that in a little bit as well. And then some of the more customized things for our specific use case. We wanted to go full OIDC, so we did not make any modifications um, to the username password context. We didn't go into the client credentials. We just focused on authorization code. That's the most secure method. So that's really where we kind of focus, and we'll show how we incorporated some of that too. And then this is probably um, our big change that we made. So most people use OAuth and they don't know they're using it. If you're ever prompted to log into a website or a service using another website or service's credentials, so logging in with your Google account when you're going somewhere else, that's essentially using OAuth or a flavor of OAuth. And that's specifically the login and consent actions. And so, because we are the only provider in our space that's doing this right now, um, and we're only logging in. We're kind of doing a self login at this point because it's going through our processes and logging in through our systems. Um, we implemented an auto login, auto consent. And this gave us two kind of important distinctions here, because we were acting as both the pass through, the proxy, as well as the authorization server. We were able to kind of leverage some of that. We can assume the user's logging in, assume the user's consenting. Otherwise, why would they be here? And then the second part that was really, really beneficial to us is this allowed machine-to-machine connections. So all of those antiquated systems, yeah, maybe antiquated is a bad word, but all of the traditional systems that didn't necessarily have web servers, that didn't understand how to process some of these protocols, could easily get to us now. So this is they can curl an endpoint, which pretty much any Unix system at this point is going to have some flavor of curl. Maybe it's not updated, but they can curl. And there's usually flags to follow redirects. So by doing this, by auto consenting, auto logging, uh, they're able to complete the OAuth chain as well and get all the information they need. The resource server and authorization server can get all the information they need. So that was kind of a really important concept there. Unfortunately, I don't have that on my gateway that we'll be showing in a little bit here, but there are some. I can show up some policies on how we got there. Okay. Like I mentioned, we only customize the authorization code context. Um, Groups did request client credentials context, or even username passwords. We were able to successfully sway them away from that, especially once we got into the auto login consent. Um, the username password, I'm not sure why OAuth supports it. I think it's for more of the legacy application, but it's just as quote unquote secure as having a normal username password. It doesn't implement all of the OAuth spec. So in client credentials is similar. It's just a more secure username password. At that point, you've got a client ID and a secret. But anyways, so that brought us to a final ish product. So we had a working OAuth service. It fully mirrored our JWT service, used the full OIDC spec, and we were able to maintain our PKI enabled access. Um, I guess the other really nice part of this is having that process be entirely transparent to the user. So, obviously in commercial spaces or in um, more accessible spaces, the auto login and auto consent may not be the most attractive choice, especially because there's a large portion on user privacy and user consenting to give these credentials out. In my space, it worked because everyone consents to monitoring anyways, and we were already kind of established as this enterprise solution. So it worked in our space. Your mileage may vary a little bit. So some of the things, getting into some of the details, we have PKI enablement. I don't have PKIs, like I said, in this system, but we can kind of go through what some of that might look like and would require. Modifying the token endpoint, it's certainly modifying this token lookup, but really what it ends up being is a custom fragment or some policy that gets used by both the token and kind of the OIDC spec as well. So, or the user info endpoint as well. So similar to that. And then the auto login and consent, we were able to keep pretty much all of it in the login and consent endpoints. So if you want, we can go through some of that. Still not quite at a good spot for this gateway, but I can kind of show you through, and it gets pretty. You can kind of understand where the flow is going. Any questions before I jump into the next part? I want to kind of show you guys what this looks like, how we can leverage some of it and make it a little more clean. Okay. All right. So let's see if I can move this somewhere else. There we go. So what I've got on my screen, hopefully we're still sharing, is an example of a legacy JWT. So the way we've got, and this is on a corporate gateway, but it's still publicly facing. There's nothing sensitive on here, so so you guys can go hit this if you feel so inclined as well. Um, but what this looks at is essentially pulling a GPS or geolocation lookup on the IP. So because we're not using PKIs, IP is really the only thing I can pull off a user, and that's assuming they're not going through VPNs, and we'll get through that in a little second. Um, but we just pull some information about the user based on their IP. Now this is a free service. Oh, sure. Just had a question. Not sure. Let's see. Let's see if I can move to the chat real quick. Or Bill, if you want to shout out that question. So I can only see part of it. But okay, we'll get to it in a second here. Yeah. So like I mentioned, so we had to support both our traditional JWT customers and our OAuth providers at the same time. So all of this information needed to make it through to a specialized OAuth format as well. So some extra stuff on top. The goal here is to minimize the amount of work we had to maintain both of these paradigms at the same time. So there are some groups that we'd seen that would take all this and they would have to reprocess again, send it out to a different service, and it was just it was pretty arduous. So getting through here, our normal JSON web token, we are able to then log into our OAuth manager, and normally we would have many more clients. We're just going to run through the test client though, and go through our basic OAuth process. Now here, like I mentioned, normally this would be a transparent to the processor, to the user. We would auto login, auto consent. Still working through that on my non-federal gateway. So we came through here, have everything we need, and then we're able to get all of this information back. Again, coming through the same JWT service. So this is how it's essentially both offerings we have, but in a similar format, same format. So coming up into Policy Manager, hopefully that comes up quick. We'll kind of go through some of the steps we did to modify everything to make sure they're all looking at the same capability. And come on. Just taking a second. Let's see. Oh, there we go. I've got this. So let's see. I can go to Philippe's question now. So as I'm not sure I correctly understood what you're trying to achieve, meaning doing OAuth but with SSL client cert auth, so bypassing login consent. Yes. So that's so Philippe, to answer your question, we were doing OAuth with SSL client cert authentication. We were able to bypass login and consent partially because right, we already had that PKI enabled, so they were already providing all their authentication credentials at that point. But then also the consent because of where we were in our space. So with our server being locked down, that consent is already, I don't want to say implicit, but it's already kind of guaranteed with that process. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks. We can always spend some time afterwards if you want. So we saw this get JWT endpoint. Everything is now really hinging on our JWT creation and retrieval. This was one of the modular things that we were able to put in through encapsulation. So we just put in an IP or some unique string to search for, and that's kind of where we're able to get all of our information through here. So like you can see, so other thing we do use for performance enhancing is we do store to caches. So we'll store the entire payload to a remote cache in this case. And that's because we run gateway clusters, and so it was a little bit easier for us to store to a singular remote cache as opposed to internal on the gateway memory system or file system. So coming through, again, we don't have to get into all of this, all of the actual policy, but we're doing a geolocation lookup through a key that I probably should be hiding at this point, but there we are. And then storing that string into our cache, signing it, sending it out. So we've got all that information right there. In order to create this where one thing can be updated at once and both our OAuth and our JWT offerings are updated at the same time, we actually went into the OTK user attribute lookup extension. So it's something in the extension itself, and we made a choice to bring this out into its own policy fragment, so we could modify it, kind of on our own space. The goal was to modify the OTK as little as possible. Makes updates a little bit easier, and then easier to move back into. So we create another assertion or another fragment. It's going to look really similar to the attribute lookup extension. And then we were able to stub out some additional information, send that JWT creation and retrieval through, and then take out some braces to make sure that the completed user info endpoint was well-formed JSON. So that got us said, the majority of the way. When we started talking about removing logins and consents, we started pulling that through our both the login and the consent endpoint. The easiest way to kind of perform this operation was to disable the display task, but then take the comparison variable and move it into the login flow. So now if the action was ever login or display, we would automatically go to login. So we never display this this prompt at all. And it's going to be pretty similar with the consent as well. There's some additional things that have to get checked for if the token's been requested or not. So there's some additional updates there. But all in all, it was like I said, the getting to this point was a little interesting to figure out all the updates that needed to happen. But once we got kind of decided that it could all be done through a couple policy changes, it made it much easier. The last little thing I wanted to kind of go through was some of the next steps that we're taking with this. Because again, in the federal space, we always have a lot of data, but it's hard to get to and kind of hard to manage. So what we've done, or what we can do, is we can take some of these attributes and we can make further decisions. We're also, let's see if I can move this over. We also have the ability, we do this again on our federal networks, to pull all this through Elasticsearch. So right now we're using Elasticsearch. Once we get some maybe a gateway upgrade, we can leverage some of the new capabilities that are coming through. But we have this ability now to really start looking at all of the users that are coming in, being able to aggregate them, being able to determine where they're coming from, things like that. So in a geolocation context, we can pull different bits of information. We had some hits earlier from New Jersey, California, but then we even get into let's see, I think this one's Singapore, right? Yeah, so we've got Singapore. So because this is a publicly facing gateway, we have the ability to not only take these tokens that we're using, but also instead of authorization, authentication, we can attribute it to different types of looks and aggregation on the users that are coming in to support our tools. So, are there any questions? Anything people want to see, get a further sense of?
If you do have a question and you want to ask it verbally, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Hi. In fact, when I was asking my previous question, I still don't fully understand, in fact, the use case and the usage of SSL client certificate versus GWT. So I still don't get it, how you do actually make an auto login feature, in fact.
Sure. So, so what I What I think what you're asking is, how or why are we using a combination of PKIs and JWTs to perform the OAuth process? Okay, fantastic. So some of that is kind of where we sit, anyways. So when let me get back into uh, probably this page. So our PKI enablement is essentially mandated. So everyone's got certificates. The kind of the value proposition of our solution in our space is that these projects don't have to manage their own security. Some do, but most of them don't. So they mitigate all of that security onto us. So we have to become the PKI store, or we have to become the source of trust at that point. So we're the ones going through trusting the certificate authorities going through this process. However, there are some groups that did not want to be behind us for whatever reason. Sometimes it's they're not configured to operate behind a proxy well, operate behind a gateway well, but they still wanted that authorization and authentication, but not having us in the middle of all their transactions. So that's probably a distinction that I could have made better. The concept of us having an OAuth provider is taking that taking that same look and feel of having us in the middle of those transactions, providing JWTs, sending them back and forth, not having the project really need to know or care how we're doing that, just as long as they're trusting us to do it. But once you go to a decentralized method in OAuth, we can't be the middleman anymore. We can't be in the middle doing all that transaction. And so that is why we migrated to, or we have that capability come through that still uses the PKI distinguished name, but then goes through the OAuth process without us in the middle of that transaction. So having that auto login and auto consent was really important for all of those users or all of the users and the machines that are operating in this environment as well. All the servers that are uh, sending us messages and requests, that they're able to be authenticated or logged in, authorized as quickly and as transparently as possible. So, like when I mentioned the machines, or machines, server certs, trying to come in, accessing those materials, if they were prompted with a website or a web page that said, "Here's how you log in, click this button," they wouldn't know how to process that. So they had to. So by changing this to, sending a redirect that automatically logs them in, having a consent that automatically grants consent, a lot of these servers were able to take advantage of our OAuth capabilities without having to stand up web servers, without having to have screen scraping, some of those more clunky ways of getting through websites. Did that help a little bit more? Yes, but still having the auth code in there. So yeah, kind of the best of both worlds. It's like I said, that's probably the most unique thing we've done with OAuth in our environment, and we're able to do that because of our environment. It's very much focused on what we're able to do in our systems. That was a great question. Thanks, because I definitely missed the concept where we went from a kind of a centralized gateway to a decentralized OAuth service. So thanks for asking that. Anyone else? Sure. I haven't actually ever done that. That is, so the question is, am I able to share code on Layer 7 community GitHub? Yeah, I've never, like I've said, I've never done that. Um, it's one of the perks and drawbacks of working in the federal space is you can't readily export anything. But I can see if I can, complete the thought on some of the auto login consent stuff, and then we can package that up for sure. Thanks, Aaron. Yes. Oh gosh, great question. Um, so we do. So we cache the payload that would be in the OAuth token. So the question is it possible to cache the OAuth token for downstream services? So we implement a remote cache. We actually use the remote cache assertion. Let me run into the policy manager. So when we get into our retrieval, so this is probably a huge speed increase. This is the performance aspect. Yes, and we're actually using Redis right now, but we're going through an AWS Elasticache. So our entire stack is cloud native at that point. So um, so what we do is right, we'll store to a cache. This has got a week-long lifespan on it, um, and then we look at pulling from that cache. So a little demonstration. So you notice our expiration doesn't change on this token. So I've already issued it, so it's in our cache fully. I do have an endpoint that removes us from the cache. We'll see if I try to refresh this. It says was not found. So and now if I refresh this, we've got a slightly newer expiration. And that was kind of hard to see, so we'll do it one more time. So it was 689. Now we're 699. So about 10 seconds or so. Um, so that is, I would say that's probably a huge benefit, not only uh, to performance from a gateway perspective, but also performance for all the attribute servers. So if you're going to policy information point to get more data about a user about a request, they probably don't want you hitting them thousands of times a second. So now I can do this to my heart's content. No one's upset. This is all just using internal services, and we don't have to worry about latency from having to go and pull a whole new set of APIs or a whole new set of information. Could we get KB on how we can configure this policy? Are you talking about the caching specifically, or the full OAuth that we were talking about? Auto renew the token automatically. Okay. Yeah, I can certainly I can try to put something together, and I will work with Aaron to get that all set up. We don't do an we don't really do an auto renew. Um, I would imagine you could use this through um, either through a collection of um, kind of some timed values where every day this pulls through. But we can certainly work with you. I think there's some fun stuff there too. We were told specifically not to auto renew tokens, but there's definitely uh, some crons that you can do to get that. Yeah, great question. Anyone else? I'm gonna throw my email in the in the window as well, just in case anyone wants to get a hold of me or discuss things further too. But I know we still got some time left, but I know that sometimes questions pop up, 20, 30 minutes or a couple days afterwards. So you guys can always get a hold of me.
We'll give it a few more seconds for any other questions to come in. Do you have anything else to cover, John?
That was no, thank you. That was pretty much it. What I'm getting to the point of is kind of my next steps on this. Like I showed, we have a Kibana dashboard that kind of shows all of these tokens as they're getting sent and used and processed. The next thing I want to do is start showing use this for more of a cybersecurity aspect. Start showing some of the browser headers that were coming through, and get some of the geolocation stuff so we can kind of see threats as they come through. So, like I mentioned, this is a publicly facing gateway; anyone can hit it. But there's some people that are trying to see what they can do. I've seen some LDAP injection attacks. Someone was trying to hit me with a CVE from 2022 the other day. There's some cool stuff. Is there an easier way to integrate this with Splunk? So I do have a Splunk integration. Um, it's on the federal side. I don't have a Splunk server that I can really test with on this side, but I do know some uh, Splunk ways to ship logs and push logs around. There's a single log monitoring framework to keep track of applications. Um, yeah, that's interesting. I definitely I'd like to get maybe a little more information. But I think there's some good stuff. We use Splunk on our federal side. All of our logs are going through Splunk as well. So there's some good integrations there.
Hey, John, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, just making sure you didn't drop off there. We've had a
Yep.
couple of people that ended up with internet issues this morning. Well, if there are no more questions, we'll start wrapping this up. First of all, we want to reach out and say thank you to John to spending some time with us to go over his expertise in this area. As I mentioned before, this session will be available later on today up on our community site, posted as one of our blogs. And stay tuned for next month where we'll have hopefully some more information for you to help you with best practices around API design, strategy, and security. And with that, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll talk to you next month.